Welcome to the show, Jessica Leahy.
Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Yeah, you're so welcome. Thanks for being a voice out there for what you care about. It's important, and I know your work is impacting a lot of people, and I'm new and very curious, so I'm psyched to dig in.
Oh, I like curious. So it's 20 years as a teacher, hearing someone's curious is like, that's it. That's what turns my crank. I love it.
That's music, right? Cool. Well, I want to start with just how do you introduce yourself? Could you just take a minute and say who you are?
Yeah, I've always referred to myself as a teacher, but I'm not teaching full time anymore, which has been a really weird, strange adjustment. So now I just refer to myself as a writer. That's sort of whenever anyone asks what I do. But I miss that word teacher in my intro. I really do. I think that's the most important stuff that I do.
Yeah, awesome. And you have children, right? How many kids do you have?
I do. I have a 22-year-old who's finishing up college, and I have a 17-year-old who's a junior in high school.
Okay. And married, divorced?
I have a husband. He is an infectious disease doc. He does mostly HIV medicine, and is head of medical ethics at the University of Vermont Medical Center. So he's doing some pretty cool stuff right now during COVID. It's been a really crazy, amazingly interesting and strange time for him.
I'm sure. Wow. We could talk about that for a long time. Whoa.
Yeah. So many cool ethical considerations when it comes to, who gets the vaccine and who gets resources and all the other stuff that goes along with, a pandemic that kills people and makes limited resources and all of that sort of stuff. It's just fascinating.
Yeah. Wow. Speaking of, I wasn't going to go here, but since it just came up in my head here, I'll ask.
Sure.
How do you think teachers are doing right now, a year into COVID? How is teachers as a whole? I mean, I know you don't know them all, obviously, but just what's your pulse?
Well, I will say that it's a really difficult time. I mean, I'm so grateful that I'm not teaching this year, mainly because the obstacles that have been put in teachers' way between them and sort of whatever it is they believe success to be. There are just so many of them. And, not having information about whether or not people were going back from, to virtual learning or hybrid learning or in-person learning with no time to prepare. Doing online learning is a learned skill. It's not something I was never trained to do that. And all of a sudden teachers were told to just figure it out with very little time to prepare. And then it's also been really confusing, why teachers weren't higher up on the list to get vaccinated. And part of it is just part of it's about the emotional impact of being at risk all day long. And part of it is about our priorities as a country. And part of it is misinformation. And it's just been a really confusing time. And, I will not go out on a limb and pretend that I know what it's like to be teaching right now in person or hybrid or virtual, because I'm not doing that right now with kids. I can tell you that most of the secret sauce of teaching has to do with the connection you make with kids and the connection you make between the kids and the material you're teaching them and the connection you make between the material and the big world and how that information can be used. And that is exceedingly difficult to do in this format. And I am just so worried for educators this year. Many of them are leaving the profession. I'm just scared to death for them.
Yeah, and then the fallout of that, right, on who's going to look after our kids in an already challenging system. Wow. Yeah. And teachers, I feel like, have so much responsibility now, and there's just so many demands, and then it's like, oh, you also need to be our childcare, and you also need to do a better job taking care of my kids than I do, and it's just like one thing after another that I feel like teachers are dealing with.
Well, and there are really successful and important programs that are in schools now that were never in schools before, like social emotional learning programs. We were doing some of that informally, but now it's an incredibly important part of education. It's the core of really good, effective substance abuse prevention programs, and also prevention programs for all kinds of risky behavior in kids. And it's also one of the things that sort of allows kids to be mentally healthy as they grow. And teachers were never asked to teach about help kids understand their social emotional learning. That was just sort of something that was supposed to happen out in life. And so, yeah, you've got the teaching you're supposed to be doing in the classroom, the worry we have to have about, bullying and social media and all the other stuff. And then on top of that, schools are responsible now for a lot of things they just were never responsible before. And that's a lot. And the social emotional learning stuff is almost impossible to do really when you're remote. And when I talk to school counselors about what it's like trying to do everything from, just advisee check-ins to, sex ed, it's really tough to do online. There are some silver linings about it, though. It allows for some kids to have a little bit of anonymity, to have a little bit, not have to be speaking up in class all the time. There are ways that some teachers have figured out how to do it that are working really well for some kids. I mean, my kid is an introvert and he's thriving during virtual or hybrid learning. So, it gets we are learning more about what we can do better. And I'm really hoping that moving forward, we'll take some of those things with us and not leave them behind when the pandemic is over.
Yeah. Very cool. You've been a teacher for what, 2 decades or so?
For 20 years, I've taught every grade from 6 to 12. My heart, I'd have to say, really lies with middle school. I've been an English teacher and also a Latin teacher, interestingly, and writing. And the last 5 years of my teaching career were spent, I was teaching in an inpatient rehab facility, drug and alcohol rehab facility for adolescents. So I was there. Nominally, I was their writing teacher and their English teacher, but I taught a little bit of everything, whatever the kids needed in order to stay up with their work or still be enrolled in school. I did a little bit of everything.
Cool. We have some overlap. My son, by the way, is in 6th grade and loving it. Middle school. Such a sweet time. It was very hard for me. Middle school was kind of rugged for me. That's a different story. Different
it's hard for a lot of people. Yeah.
Yeah, it was intense. There's so many changes and socially, it's like such a big deal. And then youth at risk. It sounds like you've had some experience, and I've listened to a couple podcasts with you talking about that experience as well, which I'll ask you about. Before I do, what had you write your first book on failure? Like, give us the kind of thesis of that book, because the title says a lot, but I'm curious why is that subject so important to you?
I had been teaching for about 10 years when I just was I was getting really annoyed, and therefore was entering a sort of there was animosity was building between the parents of my students and myself, because there are all these, and this was when I was in middle school, there were all these incredible learning opportunities happening when the kids would screw up, because part of being a middle school teacher is really just walking around all day long and watching these kids screw up and then finding the learning moments, because you can't jump on every single mistake they make and think that you're going to have a learning moment there.
Yeah.
So you kind of have this thing going on in your head, like, oh, that kid seems kind of relaxed today and in a good mood. Is this a good day to talk to him about those 5 missing assignments? All that kind of stuff. And more often what was happening was parents were stepping in and making it so there were no consequences, or that they would just take care of it themselves. And I was mad about that. And that's bad. That's a bad place to be. And then I was also concerned about what the effect was on sort of the overparenting. This is when helicopter parenting was really in the news a lot. Yeah. And I was curious about how that not only impacts kids' mental health and their feelings of, becoming an adult, but also how it affects their learning. And I hadn't seen much research on that. So that's what I wanted to know about. A study came out of Australia about that topic, and more about, not about their learning, but about sort of where the kids were from a mental health perspective. And I reported on that study for The Atlantic, and that article went viral, and then that's what led to the auction and the sale of my book. Mm. And so for me, I have the coolest job ever, because my job is I guess, I'm always sort of teaching in one way or another because my job is to get interested in something, to have a question in my head, to be curious about something, to research the heck out of it. Like I love the research and then translate it for, your average audience that doesn't care about what chemical is actually working in the brain, but really wants to know sort of what the impact has on their kid and on the cognitive development of their kid. So I'm sort of like a translator between the science and putting pieces together, and then sort of a general audience. And as far as I'm concerned, it's the best job ever. It's absolutely great.
So cool. I love talking to people who are inspired about what they do. And so basically you're saying in that book, I didn't read the book, but it's, I can gather that what you got from all of your research was that failure is helpful.
It's more than that. It's that, number one, kids are going to fail. It's not sort of a when, it's not an if, it's a when. So how do we help them deal with it when it happens? Are we going to be directive or swoop in and fix everything for them? Are we going to tell them exactly how to do things and in what order? And I know as a teacher that I can't do that. That's terrible teaching, right? If a kid says, I don't understand number one on the homework assignment, and I go over to them and I just give them the answer, that makes me a terrible teacher. So why do we so often do that as parents? And then I was also curious about sort of the impact that all these extrinsic motivators like grades and points and scores and honors and trophies and all that stuff, what impact does that have on their learning and the spoiler and on their motivation? And of course, we have Dan Pink and Edward Deci and all the other people that have written about the fact that extrinsic motivators are a nightmare when it comes to long-term motivation. So there's all these pieces of what are extrinsic motivators like grades, points, and scores doing? What's happening when we're directive over our kids? And it turns out that when we are highly directive, we actually reduce their capacity to learn because we're making it so that they don't ever have to struggle with feelings of frustration, of not understanding something right away. And then what we end up with is a kid who just gives up and isn't able to complete a task. And the main problem for me as a teacher is that it's in the tasks that are challenging for kids where often the most learning happens. Absolutely. And there's a couple of reasons for that. So if I have two kids and one has no capacity to be frustrated and just gives up and freaks out and can't finish tasks that are slightly challenging for him or her, and I have a kid who's just perfectly average but can be kind of comfortable with being frustrated and sort of figure out how to look at it from another angle, stick with it for another couple seconds, that kid is going to learn more than the kid who can't be frustrated. Yeah. And it turns out that the way we parent our kids has a direct impact on our kids' abilities to be frustrated and not give up and stick with something. And so all of that is sort of what came together in Gift of Failure. And essentially the book is built on the three things that we need to give kids to be intrinsically motivated to want to learn. And that's autonomy, a little more control over their lives and the way they do things and how and when and where and what color ink they do their things. And number two, competence, which is not the same thing as confidence. Competence is confidence born out of actual experience, trying things, screwing it up, trying it again, and connection. And for most people, they sort of think of that as like interpersonal connection. But as a teacher, it also means, yes, do I have a connection with my student, but also am I connecting this lesson here to something that matters to them, because we know that learning does not work as well when there's no emotion attached to it. Am I connecting this thing that they may be interested in to the big world out there and something they can actually do with this information out there in the world? So connection for me as a teacher means something slightly different than it does for me as a parent. But as a parent, it's really simple. It's just two things. And we have to love the kids we have, not the kids we wish we had.
Totally. I've heard you say that before. I love that. Yep.
And we can't just love them based on their performance, which often is what we do. We freak out over an A and we go silent over an F, and the kid knows right away that what's happening is, wow, I get more love from my parent. My parent loves me more when I get a high grade and less when I get a low grade. And when I ask kids that very question, overwhelmingly, they say, yes, I believe that my parents love me more when I get a high grade and less when I get a low grade. I've surveyed probably 10,000 kids on that question, and overwhelmingly their answer is yes to both of those things. So
That's sobering. And okay, there's many things I want to talk about based on what you just said. Can you unpack intrinsic and extrinsic motivation just for the parent listening?
yeah,
There are
of
a lot of
course.
parents on this podcast, and also the teachers. I want to start with an example that's a little revealing about perhaps how we're parenting. So overall, I'm just totally aligned with you here. I'm like, hell yes. And our kids play violin and viola, and neither of them like it. Right? It was like me growing up playing piano. I couldn't stand it, and my parents sort of made me play. Right?
Mhm.
And then I didn't remember anything because it wasn't in my values. I didn't really care. I was doing it for them, not for me.
Mhm.
So there's a little bit of that going on, just to be transparent here, where it's like we think learning instruments right now, it's part of our the Waldorf education, but it's also the cross bilateral stimulation. It's like doing all this cool hand-eye coordination stuff.
Right.
We think it's going to be good for them in life to at least have this as a foundation. We could care less if they actually play violin or viola for the rest of their lives. We really don't care. And we've sold them on it like, look, guys, this is actually going to be good for life. It's like a life skill, even though it doesn't seem like it to you. So we've had to use extrinsic motivation, like the chart, with the stars or whatever.
Yeah.
And it worked way better than anything else we are doing. And I know, granted, it's not a long-term solution. It's sort of a Band-Aid in a way.
Yeah, they work great in the short term. And that's why we believe that extrinsic motivators work, because they work great in the short term. That's why they're really valuable as, to boost motivation as a one-off or to get started doing something. But over the long term, they actually erode your kids' motivation to do the thing.
Yeah, totally. And we don't have a fantasy that our kids are going to suddenly become very inspired about viola and violin. We kind of know that this is just a matter of time before they bail. And I think that's just for us, we've been okay with that. But I'm curious what you would say, is there anything in our approach currently that we're doing that, I don't know, is going to backfire or isn't a good idea, given that everything I've shared with you?
Okay, so first let me just tell you that the music question and the should I let my kid quit, but it's always about music. This is by far the question I get most often about this particular topic. And my story is that I read all of the same stuff you read, and kid will be better at math if they know a little music, and it's important for a kid to learn an instrument and all that sort of stuff. So we, the people who live one house up the hill from us, were getting rid of their piano because their kids were out of the house, a little, stand-up piano. And so we rolled it down the hill and into our house. And I said, you're taking piano lessons. And that we had a honeymoon period where the kid was into it for like a week and a half. And then the fighting started about the practicing. And we tried all the things to get the kid to practice. I'm sure I promised all kinds of things. What it was doing was making me miserable and making him miserable, because we argued about it every day. Yeah. And so at a certain point, he's like, please, please, please let me quit. And I finally just looked at him and I realized what it was doing to our relationship. And I said, okay. And we wheeled the piano out of our house and down the hill to the suckers down the street, and they got our piano. So what was really interesting about that experience to me is not actually what we did in the first time around, because then a couple years later, after my kid picked up like saxophone, and then he said, because you have to pick up some instrument at school and do a school band. Then he said, I would really like to play guitar. And he started with lessons, and he said, you know what? I hate lessons. I hate lessons. I hate people telling me what I have to play and how I have to play it. So he started using this thing called Jam Play, which you can also use YouTube for now, which is essentially you take classes with a virtual instructor. And what we found out about him is that he just does not like that mode of learning. He likes to be able to repeat a lesson 6 times if he didn't get it the first time, or skip lessons or whatever. And then about a year after he really was into guitar, he said, he knew he was going to get laughed at for this. He said, if someone on like our little town listserv, which is like a local Craigslist kind of thing, if someone had a used keyboard for sale, I might be interested in that, because I think I'd like to teach myself to play piano. Next thing I knew, he was all in on piano. He was practicing constantly. And he is now still plays guitar like crazy. And I was very careful to keep my hands off of that because I did not want to put my mom's stink on it, because that's what I did with the piano. But now I bet you, is a far better piano player than he ever was.
Totally.
If I had forced him to do that thing. But that's just, and then I didn't force my younger kid to take music lessons at all, because he really disliked music. He didn't like us to have the radio on. He just didn't like music.
Yeah.
And now he produces digital music. And he taught himself how to do that. He uses, he has all this whole digital setup in his room, and he produces digital music. And never in a million years would I have predicted this.
Right.
But I do know about, for me anyway, and this is the answer to your question, is it depends, because your family's priorities may be different than mine.
Sure.
My friend Sarah has 3 kids, and they're Waldorf kids. Their agreement in their house was, you will play a musical instrument. I don't care what it is.
Sure.
If you want to switch it up every 6 months, you can do that, but you will play a musical instrument until you leave this house. That's just part of our family ethos. That's not part of our family ethos. Music, for me, I would rather spend my time making sure my kids have a joy of reading, or that they get outside and play, that kind of thing. That was my priority. So I can't tell you what you should do with your children. I can tell you that the extrinsic motivators, and specifically sticker charts, that you're using to use that carrot and stick to try to get them to do what you want them to do, you are making it more likely, number one, that they will keep wanting to quit. And number two, that they will be less likely to grab that as the thing that they're passionate about, because it's not their idea. Right. It's your idea. Totally. So there's that. And, the catch-22 within a musical instrument is you don't tend to fall in love with it until you can actually play something. And so that first entry period is difficult. But Stephen King talks about this in his book On Writing, with his son as well. He said, the kid asked to play sax. We rented a sax. The kid didn't fall in love with it. And we just realized he was never going to be that sax guy. And we let him, quit, because it has to be something that you really want to do. And I don't have the secret formula, but I can tell you that giving them more autonomy, helping them feel competent, and helping them feel connected to you is more likely to get them intrinsically motivated to do something than the carrot and stick method.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks. I had a feeling you were going to say that. That's great.
Well, and also, just really quickly, extrinsic motivators don't have to be positive things either, like money or stickers or whatever. It can also be anything you do to try to control a kid, which is like, surveillance, like watching them on their phone, reading their texts, telling them that they're grounded if they don't keep a certain GPA. Those are also extrinsic motivators too. And those will also kill off their motivation as well.
I see that time and time again. Yeah. The external bribes and all that, or punishments, right? No more screen time if X, Y, and Z. Let me ask you, and then I want to shift gears to your new book and the addiction stuff. Chores versus allowance.
Okay, so I actually do get this in, and this is not an either or sort of thing. You're right on both counts. There's actually a book where I leave off. There's another book by Ron Lieber, who's the Your Money columnist at the New York Times. Just wrote a wonderful book called The Price You Pay for College, and it's called The Opposite of Spoiled, and the entire book is about this very topic. But kids should get an allowance because they need to learn how to manage money, how to save, spend, and give, right? That's why kids need some money.
Okay.
We don't pay kids to help out around the house because that's what we do as part of being a family.
Yeah.
And the cool thing about that is there's research that shows that kids who pull together and are part of the family, like whether that's, loading and unloading the dishwasher, whatever it is they do, kids who are help keep the family moving forward are less likely to be affected by really negative stuff that happens to the family. For example, if someone, if a divorce happened or someone were to die in the family, or if something really bad happened, that sort of feeling like they're helping to keep the family moving through that difficult thing, that's a benefit to them. The research that was done was mostly during the Great Depression, but it's really important for kids to feel like they're playing an active part in keeping our family together and going forward.
Yeah.
So that's why we do not pay kids to do chores around the house. And I don't even call them chores. Household duties is what we call them.
Nice. Yeah, cool. Yeah, align
I
that.
don't want to do something called the chore. Do you?
Good point. Yeah, we have our kids. That's just part of pulling your weight as living in the house.
Yep.
You just help out around the house. This is what they do.
Yep.
You know? Cool.
Yep.
Okay. I'm very intrigued about the price you pay for college, so I'm going to look at it.
It's great. It just came out last month and it is fantastic. It's not what to pay for college. It's basically about, how colleges figure that out and how you as a parent can get insight into that process so that you can maximize the amount of, the value for your dollar for college. It's such a good book.
Okay, cool. Nice. Hey, every month I'm going to be doing a challenge. You've probably heard about it if you've been listening. You've got to be on my email list, however, to get in on the action. And you could win, a relationship course. You could win potentially coaching with me, no charge. You could win coaching with one of our coaches. There's lots of cool stuff that you can win if you play. How do you do that? All you have to do is be on my email list and look for the email that says personal update. In that email, I share a lot of personal wins and losses, highs and lows, podcasts I'm listening to, books I'm reading, favorite song, anything I'm watching, and what my challenges are, what my opportunities are, and of course, the challenge. So just go to relationshipschool.com/challenge, and you are going to be asked to just leave your email address. Okay, and then you're on my email list. Boom, done. And just make sure it doesn't go to spam. All right? relationshipschool.com/challenge. Where do you think, if you had to give parents one piece of feedback, constructive feedback, right now, given how parents parent, what would it be?
Focus on the process and less on the product. The process of learning, the process of becoming, the process of becoming an adult, the process of being a better piano player. Anytime you're focused more on the end product, the trophy, the recital, the grade, you're going to, number one, increase the anxiety around that thing. And number two, your kid is never going to believe you when they come home with a grade that isn't the one that you want. And you say, sweetie, what I care about is that you learned and you tried your hardest. When our focus is always on that end product, they're more likely to just be in a state where they can't process those sort of, okay, well, what do I need to do to get better next time? And that's what our focus really should be. Do I want a kid who does it perfectly right now with lots of intervention from me? Or do I want a kid that in 6 months can do it himself without me having to help him?
Yeah.
And, the problem is that I like things done the way I like them. I want the dishwasher loaded a certain way. I want the towels folded in the closet a certain way. But if I keep doing that because they're doing it wrong, then they're never going to figure out their way of doing it. And they're never going to be the kind of person who can do it themselves later on. And with little kids, it's little stuff. But with big kids, it's, if we take them on trips with us and they never, ever have to hold their tickets and know when to pull their ID out and think ahead about what you need at what time, they're never going to be able to do that themselves. So it's not like they hit 18 and suddenly they know how to navigate an airport. It's our job to let them flounder around a little bit and figure things out so that they don't need us next time they have to do it.
Absolutely.
And that's process over product. Focus on the process, less on the product.
Yeah, and that approach, the journey versus the destination, in a way, is like you're going to fall down, and as you learn things in life, you're going to fall down and get back up, and you're going to learn from all that, that up and down, right? And it's not going to, mom or dad's not going to come swooping in and do it for you or correct every single time you make a mistake. It seems like this is the culture. A lot of the culture we're in is also, it builds these kids who are the failure to launch kids that are still at home and they can't kind of wipe their own ass, and they're just sort of trying to, they just can't do it themselves, and it's almost like not their fault, right?
Yeah. No, it's absolutely not, and a lot of that is about something called learned helplessness. And I used to call it feigned helplessness because that's what it felt like to me when my kid suddenly pretended like he had no idea how to do the laundry. And I was talking to a friend of mine who's an expert in this stuff, and she said, Jess, it's not feigned helplessness, it's learned helplessness. And you taught it to him. You allowed that situation to blossom. It turns out learned helplessness is our default response when exposed to long-term pain, suffering, that kind of thing. And there's some wonderful metadata that just came out about this a couple of years ago from University of Pennsylvania, from Martin Seligman, the father of positive psychology. And it turns out that's our default response to discomfort. But the way we short circuit that is by giving them more control. If you want a kid who's not helpless, you must give them some control back. And that's how we sort of get kids out of that feeling of, well, no matter what I do, it's going to stink, and so I won't do anything.
Control, or do you mean responsibility, or are those synonymous? What do you mean?
In this context, the research on this used the word control. I use the word autonomy because it implies control and sort of an independence, the ability to sort of have some space. But in this context, they're sort of the same thing. The interesting studies have to do with if you have for example, two rats in a cage and two baby rats in two different cages, and you're shocking them both, and only one has the ability to turn the shocks off, but it turns it off for both rats. When those rats grow up, and you shock them from underneath, but they can jump off this electric pad anytime they want. They're not penned there. Only the rat who had control as a baby will jump off. The other rat will just stay there and take it because it doesn't realize it has the option to jump off, right? And that's what we do to our kids. We turn them into these, rats that feel like they have no agency, that they have no self-efficacy, they have no ability to act and make that act have an impact on themselves, on the world, on that kind of thing. And what we want are kids who feel like, oh my gosh, if I take action now, I can change the world. Because frankly, right now, we need our kids to really take some serious action to help change the world. And that's what I want for kids. I want kids to feel self-efficacy. I want them to feel like they have the ability to take an action and change things, as opposed to just sit there and be told how to do what they need to do and then just regurgitate the information I give them. That's not what I'm interested in. I want kids to feel heard and seen and known. And
Do you ever just get pissed off at parents and just judge them?
No, not really. Mainly because, number one, I can't do that. I mean, The Gift of Failure, I wrote that book partially because I was pissed off about other kids, but I was on a super high horse because I was doing the exact same thing to my own kids. I tell the story in Gift of Failure. My 9-year-old at the time, who's now 17, couldn't tie his own shoes. And I only found this out because he wasn't getting marks for showing up to PE because he was so freaked out about not being able to tie his own shoes. And he couldn't find the shoes that had Velcro on them. So he was just showing up to gym class in his brother's boots, and he couldn't participate. And he had a skating thing party coming up at school, and he wanted to not go because he couldn't lace skates. Those have a ton of laces. And I was horrified. So if I'm the person out there talking and writing and researching about autonomy, supportive parenting, and yet I have a 9-year-old who can't tie his own shoes, I have absolutely no right to judge. And frankly, so much of, I think, what parents are so worried about is being seen as less than, or that they're not doing enough, or that they're so worried about their child's failures and successes reflecting back on them as parents. And so I don't think it would ever be fair to judge a parent based on that kind of thing, because most of this stuff we're doing out of love. I mean, it may be misplaced, but most of what we're doing, the one exception to that I have to say, I get a little ragey, is when parents feel like that their kid is their redo. I didn't get into Harvard. I didn't get into law school. I didn't get to do these things. So I'm going to have you do that for me. Or I was a failed athlete, and therefore I want you to fulfill those dreams for me. That's like just stealing a child's life from them. And it's horrible. Yeah.
I just think I ask because I think because of everything you said, which is all really valid, we give parents a pass often because we're it's like parent fragility or something. It's like we don't want to
Mhm.
upset a parent who's already judging themselves, right?
Right. Yeah.
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 Let's
Yeah. No, I
transition.
completely agree. Yeah.
Yeah, let's transition to addiction for a minute. Do you have why write an addiction? I'm assuming you have a personal story. I mean, I know a little bit of your story, but
Hmm.
just for the listener,
Yeah.
why step into the addiction conversation?
Well, for me, for me, writing the book about it was never something I expected to do. It came out of the fact that I spent 5 years with these kids at the rehab. It came out of the fact that I got a little bit of distance from my own, that sort of worst last day of my own drinking. I'm an alcoholic. I have over 7 years. I have 7.5 years of recovery,
Hmm.
and but I have both my husband and I come from a family with a long history of substance abuse. And so, therefore, given that situation, I have two children who, right off the bat, have a much higher risk of substance abuse.
Yeah.
So, what on earth can I do with that? And then I go researching and I find out that, the powers that be and all the experts say that, quote, substance abuse or substance use disorder is preventable. So, if that's true, what does that even mean? What is specifically can we do? And what's useful to be able to try to control and what's not useful to try to control? And I just wanted the answer to that question. Both Gift of Failure and the Addiction Inoculation are both books I needed. And
Mhm.
so, as I said, I have the best job in the world, which is I need an answer. I get to spend a couple of years researching it and then write about it. It's fantastic. So yeah, as an alcoholic, um, I just needed the answers to those things. And the book is very much also for people who don't have a history, but the key thing here is, figuring out what your kid's risk looks like and then just knowing all the preventions possible so that you can try to keep it on the other side of the scale to outweigh their risks.
Cool. I want to just share my quick take on addiction and just get your take on my take.
Okay.
Are you familiar with Gabor Mate's work?
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Yep.
So
Both on substance abuse and on ADHD.
nice. I'm pretty aligned with him around addiction is often, yes, there's a genetic sort of hereditary component and can come out of an attachment trauma or series of traumas. And so it's like,
Yep.
it creates a void, right? Where the connection with caregiver is compromised enough that I might try to seek that same sort of connection through other things. And video games, addiction, toys, eventually it turns into drugs and alcohol and my phone and whatever else. I'm just curious, is that, where does your sort of philosophy around addiction fall with that sort of view?
So I promise I'm not hedging my bets here. There are so many camps. There's the addiction, and we're actually supposed to say substance use disorder. Substance use disorder is a brain disease. Substance use disorder is a response to trauma. Substance use disorder is a developmental condition. All of these things are true. This is the problem. So, and it's like this in education as well. Often in education, there's a black and there's a white, and you're not allowed to fall anywhere in the middle. And it's the same thing with recovery. I don't think there's any one way everyone has to do recovery. So, I am a big fan of Gabor Mate. I love his writing. I love, and I've seen him speak a couple of times. So the common refrain is that, and I hate to use this analogy, but that the common refrain is that genetics is the bullet, but trauma is the trigger. So that bullet can be loaded in the gun, but what really gets that bullet to take off is the trauma that And from my if my experience and the kids that I've taught and the people that I've met in recovery are any indication, I don't know many people that didn't at least have one of those factors. And if you read the work of Nadine Burke Harris, The Deepest Well, adverse childhood experiences are a huge part of this as well. So when you look at risk factors for substance use disorder, there's sure having a genetic predisposition is part of it. It's about 50 to 60% of the puzzle, but the rest of it is adverse childhood experiences. It's early academic failure. It's social ostracism. It's aggression towards other children early in life. It's all of these traumas that we're talking about. So if you were to at any one time, poll the kids in my rehab classroom on how many ACEs or adverse childhood experiences they have. Out of 10, their number is usually 8, 9, or 10. It would be pretty rare to see someone with no genetic history and no trauma. And I guess Gabor Mate would often say that there is no one out there without some form of trauma. But those two things, I think, are the big issues. There was always someone in my classroom who had lost a parent, always someone in my classroom who had been abused as a child, always someone in my classroom who had grown up with substance abuse in the home. So look at those adverse childhood experiences, and that really is a good preliminary list of the big risk factors for substance use disorder.
Cool. What else? I'm curious, given that you wanted to solve a problem in a way and follow your own curiosity with the book. Mm-hmm. What else, I guess, is one of the big takeaways that a reader could glean from your new book here around addiction and this culture?
Yeah. So the thing that was most shocking to me and also most hopeful to me is that right now, only 57% of the schools in this country have a substance abuse prevention program at all, at any kind. And of those, only 10% have one that's evidence-based. So we are not pulling our weight in schools in terms of really preparing kids to have the tools they need in order to prevent this, in order to, stay away from drugs and alcohol. At the same time, we have this new thing in schools called social emotional learning programs. And social emotional learning programs are at the heart of every evidence-based, shown to be effective drug and alcohol prevention program, substance abuse prevention program. So we have the pieces in place. We know we need more of it. We have the pieces in place, and there are programs that work. So for me, when I talk to parents about what's most important to, and this is why there's such fun overlap with the gift of failure, that connection piece is essential. The trust piece is essential. The information, I am always a fan of more information for kids than less. I was one of those parents who would never in a million years, not let my kid read a book because it was too old for them. My mom was the kind of person who told the librarians when I was little, no, she can take out any book in this library that she wants. And I think that when we look at the research on what actually works in a prevention program, it has to do with giving kids real, precise, accurate, evidence-based data, and then helping them use that data in order to make some smart decisions for themselves. And social emotional learning programs help with that. Inoculation theory, which I talk about in the book, helps with that. Helping them understand why their brains are specifically vulnerable to drugs and alcohol during adolescence, and helping them understand that we're not saying you can't drink and do drugs just because. It's because of these very specific reasons. We have to give kids whys more often. The why is at the heart of the matter, and why they will listen, as opposed to just shut you off like you're a wah 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 Peanuts character adult, so a Charlie Brown adult.
And you focusing on mostly substance use and abuse. I'm curious, the quote dry drunk or whatever, that maybe doesn't really do deeper work to resolve maybe the root of the symptom that's causing the symptom called addiction. We could say just transfers onto a new thing like a phone. I'm curious, is there any concern of yours, or what would you have to say about teens and phones, and how much the ridiculous amount of time kids are just glued to their phones as opposed to actually another human being?
Yeah, so there's this really,
or whatever.
Yeah, there's a really, the listeners can't see us, but you just put your little hands up to do some air quotes around, around the word addiction, because there is a huge question about whether or not something like a screen time is that an addiction, because you're not introducing a chemical to your body. I specifically stayed away from tech in the book, mainly because I felt like we had enough to sort of cover within substance abuse. But you're absolutely right that it hits on the same chemicals in our brain. I mean, the reason we do things like play video games or look for likes on Facebook or Snapchat or Instagram is because we get this dopamine hit. In fact, we get to the point where I start to reach for my phone knowing I'm going to check Twitter to see how many people like that last tweet of mine, and I'll get a dopamine hit before I even open up Twitter.
Totally.
And that is, putting up air quotes, intoxicating, right?
Yeah.
But so the other thing I want to talk about is that there are people who do this better than I do because they care a lot about tech, and they're really learned in how tech works and how tech affects kids and how certain apps affect kids. So like there are people out there like Devorah Heitner, who wrote this wonderful book called Screenwise.
Yeah, we interviewed her here.
She's fantastic. And she does this stuff so well. I think tech is a whole other thing, and tech is about house rules and limitations and expectations, and that's also going to be around your family's own priorities. But I was hesitant to go into talking about it as an addiction in the same sense that I was talking about chemicals as addiction.
Cool. I love that you circled back to connection and the social emotional learning being such a driver of not only people getting sober, but just feeling better in their lives.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the reasons I'm doing what I'm doing, right? At the relationship schools, I want to get kids and people more connected to themselves and other people. Because I think when we have nourishing connections, life is a little better, and then I can learn, right? Because I feel safe in my body and my skin. I heard one of our podcast guests a couple of years ago said connection before curriculum, and I really like that.
Yeah. Someone asked me yesterday about at the beginning of the addiction inoculation, I talk about the fact that there is a theory that, I don't know if you've heard the theory that, it's bread that created civilization because we had to start harvesting wheat and all that other stuff. Well, there's a counter argument that actually it wasn't the bread, it was the feasting and the beer that was made to have at the feasting that allowed us to go from individual small groups of hunter-gatherers to a more hierarchical society, because the beer allowed people to overcome social anxieties and hierarchies, to sort of be able to talk to people of different social levels. So in that sense, as a, if you're looking at it from that sense, it's actually alcohol has brought us together as a community, has connected people. And for the majority of people out there who don't have a brain like mine, the kind of brain that just reacts differently to the presence of alcohol, that's totally great. I mean, I think we need to teach our kids to have the ability to connect with people without alcohol, but I'm absolutely not saying that people who have a healthy relationship with alcohol can't connect, because what we know and what I found out is that, yeah, sure, alcohol can connect people, but then for about 10% of us, it drives us to an incredibly isolated, lonely place. Mm-hmm. And there's a common refrain that recovery is not about not drinking it, but it's about connection. Recovery is the opposite of addiction is the opposite of connection. And so for those people that get driven to that really lonely, isolated place, it is the connection that's going to help us get out. I just find it really interesting, though, that, at the beginning, alcohol brought us together, and then for a small subset of us, it drives us apart from the people we love. And then really it is about reestablishing that connection that pulls us back together.
That's cool. Cool way to think about it. I mean, in college, for me, alcohol was definitely the thing that helped me connect, because I was so insecure, and it brought me in, but it brought me into connections that were somewhat superficial, right? And I felt more relaxed. And then I would go deeper the more I drank. I could get even more honest. Like, the only way I could do male to male sort of intimacy and vulnerability was after we were both drinking, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the next day it was like, oh, that didn't happen. We didn't really talk about that. That was my capacity at the time. So it was helpful, but it was too much, too often. And then I actually couldn't mobilize just the part of me. I never had to really face my insecurity, right? I kept relying on this crutch called alcohol.
Right. Yeah. And as also people say in recovery, it works really well until it stops working, and it will work at first. And, and for a lot of people, there's that feeling of, oh, this is the thing I have been looking for. And, even today, the drink I miss the most is the one that I would have before I go to that party. So it makes walking in the door a little bit easier. That really is, for me, still the drink I miss the most. But now that it's not there, I've had to deal with why it's hard for me to walk in the door. Yeah. And that, for me, has been really a wonderful silver lining.
Totally. And that's so interesting, right? That's like endlessly curious and fascinating to me to like look in that
But it's
door.
hard. Right.
Yeah.
But it's hard. And not everyone
Yeah.
wants to go there. You
Yeah.
know, it's a hard door to open.
Yeah.
No pun intended. Or, yeah.
Cool. Well, we're about done here. I just want to ask maybe 2 more questions. Where can people find you and your book?
Everything about me is at jessicaleahy.com. All my journalism, there's videos of me doing some keynotes and stuff like that. But I'm on Twitter a lot because, as at least this was true a couple of years ago, as a profession, teachers are the largest users of Twitter. And so when people say to me, isn't Twitter a dark and horrible place? I say, not when you follow 11,000 educators. It's not, because I think that's about a 10 or 11,000 educators. I just love it there. So I'm at Jess Leahy on Twitter and at Teacher Leahy on Instagram.
Okay, awesome. We'll put those in the show notes. Cool. And one of our missions here at the Relationship School is to reach a lot of young people through relationship education. I don't call it social emotional learning. And it's basically that. It's definitely under that umbrella. And if I was to speak in front of 1,000 teens and I could only teach them one thing about relationships, and you were whispering in my ear, what would you want me to tell that group of teenagers?
It's funny because I'm always asked, what would you want to tell parents about? And I've got lots of things that I would want to tell parents about teenage relationships. But I think for me, to value the relationships above the need to, have someone else be better or worse than you, or to beat them on that test. Constantly in my classroom, what I see when I hand a test back are kids like saying, "Oh, what'd you get? Oh, did better. Oh, what'd you?" And I always say to them, which thing do you think you value more here, your relationship or, the fact that she got an A- and you got an A? And maybe value that relationship a little bit more than those other sort of things that aren't that important.
Yeah.
It's also, it's hard for someone, I'm 50. It's hard for me at 50 to tell an adolescent what to value in that relationship, because the things I have valued in my relationships have changed so much over time. And, the thing I value in my friends now was not the same thing I valued in my friends when I was 16. And that's okay. One's not better or worse than the other one. They play a different role in your life as you grow.
Yeah, cool. Well, Jessica Leahy, thank you so much for being here, and thanks for what you're doing in the world.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I love talking about this stuff, and I'm so glad to find people who do too.
Cool. Okay. Amazing. The first part of the action step is always go check out this person's work if you want, jessicaleahy.com, and that's LAHEY.com. She's got her couple of books on there and other stuff that she's been involved in over the years. Of course, you can get her books on Amazon as well. And I recommend you do that. Very, very good stuff. So, action step. All right. There's many things I could dive into here, but I think so I'm going to do one for parents and non-parents, okay? So if you're a parent, your job within the next week is to let your kid fail or fall down doing something and not come in, rescue, shortcut, enable, etc. And then notice what comes up for you and how uncomfortable that is, and then share with a friend. If you're not a parent, do the same thing. If you're a helper, many of you are helpers, just do that with someone in your life, a coworker. Excuse me. Yes, I'm asking you to do the uncomfortable thing and turn away from finishing it for someone. Yeah. I know it's a little abstract, but I think you get the gist based on what Jessica and I talked about here. Yeah. Really valuable, right? And if you're new with us, try to sign up for our monthly challenge, relationshipschool.com/challenge. You can always catch a live training if you go to relationshipschool.com/training. And if you want the latest Instagram short nugget video where I'm giving you tips about whatever, needs, codependency, boundaries, etc., just make sure you're following me on Instagram at Jason Gaddis. That's Jason with a Y. Cool. Okay, everyone, thanks again for your ears. Thanks for subscribing and listening. and making the world a better place through how you apply yourself here and becoming a better listener, speaker, etc. And we'll talk soon. Hey, thanks so much for listening. Please subscribe to this YouTube channel. Share one of these videos with a friend. We want to help the planet get their act together around relationships. And you are one of them, so thank you.